Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Kohenet Devorah Gren here with co-host Kohenet Annie Matan for the 15th episode of Tending Lilith's Fire. Welcome. Today's subject, at least in part, is sacred heresy, a term I think coined by Annie, as far as I know, which she will tell us more about, and then we will get into it. And we also were talking about sacrifice and a whole range of things, some of which will come up now, I'm sure, and some which won't. Annie?
Yeah, so this, we're in like a mutual admiration circle here because this phrase came up in an experience that was facilitated by Devorah, a conversation about Lilith in the Lilith circle. It sort of came into my mind as Devorah was talking about Lilith and the ways that she calls us to, I can't remember what the language was, but like deconstruct patriarchal practices in pursuit of what is meaningful and holy. And to me, I can't remember where this phrase popped up. I was like, oh, this is the work of sacred heresy, of like challenging tradition in pursuit of what is meaningful for us, of what is holy for us, of what is sacred, in ways that to some people feel heretical.
And so I just want to bring in Judith Plaskow and her book Standing Again at Sinai and her other writings, in which she posed a question relative to Judaism, but I think it's true for any organized religion or spiritual tradition, really, and that is, if you feel drastic changes needed, can you do that within the tradition, stay within and make those changes, or do you have to go outside of it? And I think both of us have done both. I know I've done both, and then come back, and it's been a very interesting few cycles. And so you started up your services again. Do you want to say a word about that, because that certainly is a unique creation, I would say.
Yeah, sure. So I founded a Jewish community in Toronto in 2014 called Matnot Lev, Gifts of the Heart. And I had been on a Shemitah year, a sabbatical, since last High Holy Days, which was the first year in 7 years that I didn't lead a High Holy Day experience. And this year I decided to relaunch inspired by Lilith and Devorah's t-shirt. You can show it off.
Oh,
It
sure.
says, "What would Lilith do?" And so this is, Devorah's work. And I thought, what would Lilith Yom Kippur look like? And actually, we were talking about, so my approach to Yom Kippur in the circle I led in what I hope is the lineage of Lilith and sacred heresy was to what I called it flipping the script. And instead of fasting and refraining from comforts on Yom Kippur, I asked the question, what if we were nourished, we experienced nourishment and pleasure and comfort at this time of year as a way to bring us fully into presence with what's possible and the ways in which we want to repair ourselves in the world and start the year feeling fully resourced rather than depleted, hangry, tired, headachy.
Guilty.
Guilty, right.
And I have to say, I'm pretty radical. And I was so taken aback when I read that, when you first put it out. And I just loved it, because I've been, as I just said to you, as a number of other people again, all traditions, I think, fighting against the concept of sin, which is very much up for Jews at the Day of Atonement, which is what Yom Kippur is, a time of apology and confession and things like that, breastfeeding and things that I just don't agree with. I think it's really important, and we do, and some of us do a nightly and a daily, or certainly a nightly part of an evening prayer, moral inventory and accounting, if I've hurt anybody, to ask for forgiveness, whether we hurt that person on purpose or unintentionally. And so the idea of having a whole string of things that one confesses and asks forgiveness for has not resonated with me in a really long time. And I also think it's really important that, I believe in asking your forgiveness, or, whoever I might have hurt, rather than God's. Although I'm sure if it was really awful, I probably would also turn to her, but usually to the person. And so we were talking now about, do we need to sacrifice? That is a sacrifice, which, as I said, runs across many traditions, which do fasting for various purposes and periods. And in Judaism, the idea is, and I'm sure in other traditions too, that you fast so that you pray. You're so intent on praying, being serious and somber is how I was raised, that you don't eat. And I just said to Annie, it kind of works in reverse for many people. They're worried about getting a headache. They are starving, and so they're thinking about food. They're not necessarily concentrating more on the task at hand. I think it's just interesting how we go into this holiday. We have a 10-day period of high holy days, preceded by a month of deep introspection and self-reflection called Elul. And I think, like holidays, major holidays in any tradition, it can be a time of renewal, of introspection that serves us, or it can be something we feel guilty about, maybe not observing well enough or properly, whatever that is. And as I said also to Annie, there's been a book, I can't remember the name now, but it may have the word sin in the title, or Missing the Mark. And it's an anthology of about 20 spiritual leaders, clergy, who are also very uncomfortable with the word sin and talking about what that means. And, so I think both Annie and I, our work is partly to flip the script, to look at new languaging for things that are part of us. And of course, always looking for, I think, new ways or deeper ways to connect with divinity, both in ourselves and throughout life and throughout the world, our world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of that. And I think what excited me about this approach to Yom Kippur was just the timeliness too of this year has been hard, there's been a lot of suffering already, and a lot of disconnection and hunger, if not for food, then for connection and for each other. And for me, Yom Kippur is about, so the Hebrew word tshuva, which gets translated often as repentance, the root of it is about return. And so returning to self, returning to ourselves, to our relationship with the divine, and to our beloved people. So, to speak to what you said about, asking forgiveness between people, and also asking forgiveness for the big things we've done in our relationship to ourselves and the wider world. But that, and not but, and that process of return, I felt this year that enough already with the suffering, and the I'm not doing enough, and I'm not doing it right. And whether about COVID or worthy political causes, but I felt like maybe we just need to take a breath. And we've talked here before about NAP ministry and other amazing movements that say, in order to be a good activist, you have to be well resourced. And I thought, what better way to start the year than with the intention of loving ourselves up while engaging in prayer and introspection, and the question of what can the world look like that is different than the way it has looked before, and what's my role in that?
Loving ourselves up, such an important concept to mention here, because otherwise it's so much about self-sacrifice and giving our power over to a deity. Unfortunately, also translates to giving our power over to a spiritual leader, which can be very dangerous on so many levels, as we know. You raised something before also about things we give up and why. And people give up things for Lent, people give up things, do fasting at Ramadan, and many traditions, and we do the fasting. And so I raised this also. I conducted a ritual on Yom Kippur as part of a service, and asked about, first of all, what do you consider as sacred? If you don't call on God or Creator or Spirit, how do you image that which is sacred to you and hold that holy, truly holy, and something that does give you renewal and resource, like a fountain, just keeps recycling, right? And gives us our resilience. But also, why is it necessary to give things up? And should we do that? And then, yes, of course, we should give up things that are not healthy for us or that hurt others. But I think you raise an important question of asking why, and not just doing it blindly.
Yeah, and I used to find meaning and personal resonance in giving up comforts, one day a year, and especially if you, on Yom Kippur, one of the Haftorah, like one of the biblical stories that's read, is from the book of Isaiah, is a prophet who is saying, like, what are you fasting for while you're treating people like crap? Like, this is not what God wants. God doesn't care about you not eating food. God cares about how you treat each other. And but there's I think sometimes when we pay attention to that text, maybe it feels important to experience the kind of suffering of the people that are suffering in that text. And that's a very Jewish concept of, be kind to strangers because you were a stranger, be kind to the poor. And if you forget what it's like to be that, here are, I think the prohibitions on Yom Kippur enable us to feel what it's like to not have resource, right? Like to be hungry and have sore feet and be smelly and dirty and disconnected physically from other people. That can be a very powerful tool for people to understand, in contrast, their privilege. And so, I recognize that there's power there, and I want to explicitly say, and as I did at the circle that I facilitated, I welcome everyone choosing the practice that feels right and meaningful and connective for them. And for me, I live a pretty privileged life, but also I've been in a hard place. And so for me, the idea of like feeling loved up, being well nourished, well resourced, comfortable, feels and I do think this is a new paradigm concept, feels like it gives me more, it increases my capacity to do what the world needs. And instead of repeating, and we've talked about this too on Tisha B'Av, like that returning to a traumatic or traumatized state over and over again only perpetuates the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder of being in a traumatized state. And if we want to reprogram ourselves, if we want to rewire these neural pathways and create a different future, instead of bringing ourselves into a place of trauma and suffering, let's bring ourselves into full capacity, nourishment, comfort, possibility, and thriving. Because when we feel that, when we have tastes of that, we can only bring more and more. And that's really where we want to go as a society, right?
I think there's also a distinction to be made between, you said something about suffering for the sake of spiritual enlightenment or growth. And I guess interchangeable could be sacrifice or giving something up, but I think there's a way that it doesn't mean we really suffer, but I will consciously make certain sacrifices, let's say, like trying to take a tech Shabbat and turn my phone off on Friday nights, at least for 12 hours. And yeah, that feels like a sacrifice. Am I suffering? I can't really say that I am. I'm just, it makes me feel like I'm spoiled or just self-indulgent to be so connected, like it's at the end of my placenta, not my placenta, my umbilical cord, sorry.
Yeah.
Placenta on the brain from something else. And so, yeah, there's that difference. And also what we choose to give up.
Yeah, because I challenge the word sacrifice in that context. Because why are you giving up using your phone on Shabbat?
Right. It is so that I can be more deeply in a sacred space.
Right. But I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily. I know why we're using the word sacrifice here, and I kind of want to challenge it because we're not putting our phone on the altar.
You see behind me, by the way.
Yes.
Yes. Part of an ancient altar. Yes.
I mean, I guess there's a way in which we are.
Choice. Right. I mean, so yeah. If you have another word.
Well, I'm just thinking about that. I'm like, and also, when we fast from food, the use of the word sacrifice in this context. Sacrifice, I think, is supposed to be giving up something of value, right?
Yes, let's go on that premise. Yeah.
Yes. So in that way, like we certainly value our phones and our connection, our connection through technology to the outside world. I don't know, it feels more nuanced.
It's a very strong word. I think
Yeah.
that's the problem. And so it's certainly different from making a conscious choice to do something differently.
Mhm.
On Friday to sundown to Saturday sundown, I will do something different.
Mhm.
I want to set that apart from the rest of the week. Why? So that I can pay more attention to family, so that I can be in a more sacred space, even though I live in a sacred space, but so I can devote more time perhaps to prayer or to my writing, or which many in Judaism would not do, or to things, or to take a walk in nature, or to do things that I might not make time for the rest of the week. So it's
Well,
setting
that
apart.
and that makes me think about, so Yom Kippur is Shabbat Shabbaton. It's like the ultimate Sabbath.
Yeah.
And the Friday sundown to Saturday sundown is Sabbath. And if the purpose on Yom Kippur of these practices is to return to self, then of course, to me, I'm like, well, that's just like the big, if you haven't done it yet, now's your chance on Yom Kippur. Whereas Shabbat, every Friday, is an opportunity to return to our whole selves. And so the practices we choose to take on, in my view, the practices I choose to take on or let go are for that purpose.
Right.
To be the, to return to the parts of myself that I don't get to experience the rest of the week.
Right.
And Reb Zalman, Schachter Shalomi, wrote about this in the book Jewish with Feeling. I love his chapter on Shabbat, where he says, if you don't get to write during the week, then Shabbat, of course you should write. And, if you're a potter, he even says, if you're a potter who doesn't get to do your pottery, then you should get to do that on Shabbat, because that's what makes you feel like you. And that's the most sacred thing to be.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. And that is, by the way, the Sabbath is our holiest holiday.
right. And
I
we
just,
have it every week
yeah,
because we need it. And there's an idea that like we need that space. Humans need that space to like let go of trying to perfect anything, let go of trying to change anything,
or be
um,
anything, or
or
be
be, yes,
doing anything, right? To
yes,
remember
right.
to
It's
be a
the like
human
human
being.
beings versus human doings. Like if
Right.
we could just be our, I don't remember who coined that. I heard it in a renewal space,
Yeah.
a Jewish renewal space. So I think I just want to challenge the idea that we have to sacrifice anything for that. I think for me personally, and many people don't feel this way, and that's okay. But for me personally, if it feels like a sacrifice, then it doesn't feel in alignment for me,
Mhm.
for being most fully myself. And that comes from trauma. Like for me, I'm aware that having lived through a lot of trauma in my measly 42 years or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, this is, I say this about comfort zones too, that there's so much to be learned when we finally feel safe. There's so much to be learned and gained, and so much growth can happen when we feel safe and nourished and nurtured and comforted, and when we're experiencing pleasure, like Pleasure Activism, an amazing book by Adrienne Marie Brown, which is like a collection of essays on how pleasure and comfort enable us to do more, to connect more, to change the world. And so for me, the concept of sacrifice feels like I have to take something away from myself.
Uh-huh.
And that doesn't feel like it leads me anywhere good.
It's a good distinction. Yeah. Yeah. So what else do we do that is sacred heresy? I think we read language a lot. We both change up customs.
Mhm.
I actually will share one that I started um, I won't say reactivating, but redoing years ago. And that is it's a two-handled cup and a bowl of water, well, or a cup of water,
The
for
washing instruments.
hand washing. And I put that into part of this ritual that I led as a way of entering.
Mhm.
And when I first did it many years ago, I don't know, at least 15 years ago, it was with an Orthodox Jewish set, because this is a practice of having, I want to show this better if it will show, of having this
Hold it
two-handled,
near your face if you can.
right,
Sometimes that helps. Yeah.
there, two-handled cup. And I thought, I was very nervous when I first did it the first couple of times, but I started using it in feminist spirituality type rituals. And I loved doing it. I mean, partly because it felt, rebellious, but I've really come to love the custom. And so many cultures have it. When I was in a Yoruba spiritual house and then did my research in South Africa, there's a lot of hand washing going on for different reasons, but before and after meals, for example. And my research was with the Lemba of South Africa, who are of Jewish lineage and descent, and so it had double meaning for me. And I was less concerned about the fact, although some would make a point of this, that all over Africa and all the different countries, people are probably doing hand washing customs and rituals, and I think very likely the Muslims as well as Jews as well as Christians are doing it because they're more African perhaps than they are whatever religion they are. But so I use it to this day as part of my own rituals, which are a combination of Afro-Semitic and feminist spirituality practice. And so, well, we were going to talk about ritual and practice. That'll be another day, but that is one of mine.
Tell me what feels heretical about bringing hand washing into feminist spiritual practice.
Because I knew that the bowl, the cup, especially a two-handled cup, was designed for an Orthodox audience. And so I felt even guilty at first about co-opting it. But then I also thought about my own response to orthodoxy in any religious tradition. And I really rail and rebel against that because it's patriarchal, it's hierarchical, it's usually very misogynistic or at the least quite sexist, in my view. And I know there are many Orthodox women who would argue with that, and I also, would not necessarily apply this to modern Orthodox, but I still to this day I would say don't think they would appreciate me using it in circles other than the Jewish ones, let's say.
Got it.
Yeah.
So it's the taking it out of the Jewish, using a Jewish object in a context that isn't Jewish and that maybe challenges Judaism.
Which also brings up another question that somebody put on Instagram the other day of, can you do cultural appropriation within your own tradition? And so that just ran through my mind. And probably there might be some who say I did that. But for me, because I'm born and raised Jewish, it was somehow an important connection to my own lineage, and I had to make it meaningful for me. And since I'm not Orthodox, that meant I was going to bring it into the circles that I lead. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's how we evolve. I love it. I mean, I think it's a great example. Not that you need my approval, but because it felt, you felt the edge. I think that's the key piece is what it feels like. And for me, the fasting on Yom Kippur thing, when I posted about it on Instagram, and I was a bit nervous, I was just like, okay, I'm doing this crazy thing. I'm going to share, what kind of pushback am I going to get?
Right.
And it was the most engaged post on my Instagram, more than selfies, which is that never happens. It was you're getting 95% more engagement on this post. And I was shocked. And I was shocked by how many people commented and said, I love this, or I do this, or actually Girl God Books said they talked about it as fasting from patriarchy, which I really loved. And so I felt so relieved that it was well received. And I also lost a couple followers immediately, which, that happens. But it told me, okay, there's an edge here.
Right.
And it feels exciting to be owning for me, I feel excited to own my place on that edge.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to think about if there are any other, I'm sure there are other examples.
I'll bring up Marcia Falk's Book of Blessings, which she did, I think, in the early 90s. And she, instead of using a male god's name in liturgy and poems, she changed it to the flow of life, I think, or the source of blessing. She did not use goddess language, and she said that, and she had her reasons. But just that shift to source of life instead of our Father, our Lord,
our King,
which ruins for me one of my favorite melodies, Vinu Malkenu, and I think you or somebody else gave me new language. I think that was you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so can you say it again?
Imenu Malkatenu.
Right, right.
That's
So
our mother, our
our
queen.
queen.
But we can take this out, we can take the royalty out, but and there are some who object to the hierarchical nature of that. But this year, especially when I think sovereignty is really up, I really like owning our sovereignty and naming ourselves as queens and kings and the responsibility that we hold in that role. So for the first time, I actually am really enjoying the Malkatenu, our queen, piece of that.
I think many people use our mother, but I also think our mother, our queen, it definitely has its place in terms of being a corrective till people get a little bit used to that. And then we can,
Then we can sub in all kinds of names for the divine.
Right.
But then, when you get further into that prayer, I think some of the language, some of what we're asking for anyway, is like forgiveness from sin. So maybe, what does it? Be kind and gracious to us. Oh, I have to look at it to be able to translate it.
Yeah. But I just want to say that I think when Marcia Falk wrote that, I'm sure for a number of people that was heresy and not particularly sacred, because she took out the name of God. Now, I mean, she uses that in other things she's done, but in this particular book, there were, and maybe God is in there too, but mostly she was replacing it with
replacing,
blessing. Yeah.
And what when the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute, when they first started, my gosh, like we were lambasted by some traditional Jewish scholars. They called us idol worshippers, and pagan idol worshiping perverts.
Witches.
Oh, we didn't get, there was witches, I feel like was in there, but it was
later
at the beginning, perverts, I remember very clearly. And it was so uncomfortable to hear about a Jewish group that was focusing on earth-based, embodied, feminist, experiential Judaism. And
which it was 3,000 years ago.
Yes, exactly. And that's for that. I really appreciate you saying that, because, and I know it's not usual that I'm the one saying this, but I know we're coming close to time, but I like the way that loops us back to the question of like, what is sacred heresy? Because the purpose to me and the reason to ask the question, what would Lilith do, is because she was at the beginning. She was there at the beginning. And then when she left, in her story, like the fact that she had to leave, and she chose to leave the patriarchy, I'm going to say, and she said, this is not the way.
Right.
And then we actually have so many goddess rooted traditions in the history of what became Judaism, that then got buried under patriarchy. And so when I ask the question, what would Lilith do in this context? I want to find those roots again. I want to find out, what does Judaism look like? What can spirituality look like when the divine feminine, and if it's Lilith, it's the badass, I'm fucking gonna do what makes sense, and you're not gonna lay on me. The fierce feminine, what would she do, and what would spiritual practice look like through that lens? And that feels exciting, an exciting place to be, a powerful place to be, and a place of remembering for those of us who have that in us, the remembering of a priestesshood from lifetimes ago. It feels very potent to me.
Yeah. Well, that I just have to put in one plug now that you've said that. I'll be giving a talk on pre-Hebraic and pre-Judaic roots and goddesses this coming Friday, October 1st, through Ner Shalom. We'll put that in the notes. And so it's part of a series on the sacred feminine, in which we'll also talk about Asherah and the other Hebrew goddesses, and Shekhinah, and then an integrated piece on the fourth Friday that we're doing it in the morning. It's 11 in the morning, about, as we do in the Lilith circles, where does she live in us? Where does that energy live in us? Anyway,
I'm so excited. I don't think I can make it to that, but I'm so excited that it's happening. And like you, Devorah, were the one who introduced me to this stuff in the first place. When I was studying to be a Kohenet, you were my teacher of the history of the archaeology of the sacred feminine in the ancient Near East, right? So like that's how we met, and that's how I associate you. Like the roots of that understanding in my practice comes from you. So it's this like beautiful full circle, a
Yeah, full
spiral
circle.
moment, right?
So happy about it. Absolutely. And I do want to say that we have a membership structure, Lilith Institute. And so if you are a member, you will get a recording of that talk that I just mentioned. So,
Yay, good.
well,
I'm
members.
in. That's great to hear. Oh, and for anyone, I'll put the info in the notes about Matnot Lev. I believe I will be offering some online services. You know, in my relaunch, I'm maybe next, I know we always do this at the end, maybe next time we'll talk about, and then we don't. But at some point we might talk about Shemitah, sabbatical year. And so one of the things I'm thinking a lot about is, you know, after having done nothing, and I'm taking this from Risa Allison Cooper, she's the retiring, or yeah, the what do you call it? Has spent a number of years running the Shoresh Jewish environmental programs, and she's leaving. And she talked about Shemitah, like thinking about what do we want to pick up again with intention, not just picking up everything, but what do we want to pick up again? And so for Matnot Lev, I've been thinking a lot about that. And I'll put info in there for how you can find out more about Matnot Lev. And one of the things I think I'll be offering is an online Shabbat experience.
Great, great.
And maybe some family things.
All right,
Stay
all
tuned.
right. Oh gosh, what did I just want to say about that? It's left my brain. Oh, Shemitah, that we may also talk about, well, as we just were, continue the discussion of what do we need to release, because
Yes.
at new moon and certain times of the month, we do want to think about that as well, just to keep our energies clean so that we can move forward as positively as possible. So it's been wonderful having this conversation, as always, Annie, and we
Thank
hope
you.
that you found something meaningful, those of you viewing this, and really would love your comments in the comments.
Yeah. Yay. Wishing you all, this probably won't be up until, so whenever you see it, you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, whatever. And we'll see you next time.
Till next time.